accomplish today, which is, in my vision of it, we will be brainstorming, sharing ideas together. There are challenges that come with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, which we all know, or if we don't know, we will know by the end of today. And it is easy to get frustrated with the complexities and try to figure out who's not doing what and why am I so frustrated and why is it not working, starting with the person at home situation where you're attempting to solve problems that in communication, behaviors that aren't working. So, and then it spills out into the community when you go to schools and people don't know fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or you go to the doctor and they don't think it's important. And it just gets more and more difficult as we try to get services. So we want to, today, my idea is that we own the problem together, that when someone brings up a challenge or a frustration, whether it's a provider or a parent or a person with FASD, it's a problem we all own. It's something that we all work to solve, and I'm encouraging myself as well as the rest of you to use the word we instead of you or I. If you're talking about the general problem that you're experiencing, trying to look at it from a more systemic viewpoint of what's not working here and what can we do to help that. So with that said, I have two short programs this morning, and I want to, as far as looking at the agenda, I want to start out with some information on FASD-informed provider. I'm realizing that I could probably dim that. Can you guys all see that okay? Maybe when I figure it out, I will be able to dim it right in front of the screen. There's a lot involved in just that phrase, FASD-informed provider. So I'm going to go through that first, and it ties into a whole lot of things that we'll be talking about during the day. I just want to introduce it at the beginning, and then we'll come back to it and see how it ties in. I also want to introduce the concept of the medical home. Becky and Ann are going to be talking about the concept of the medical home and how that might apply to people and families dealing with FASD as perhaps something, I don't have all the answers, but I was pretty excited when I came across it and looked at how other people have used it with FASD, with complex issues that come up with FASD through the lifespan. And that's another issue in terms of, are we talking about children or adults? All adults have been children. All children will become adults, and the problems with FASD last a lifetime. So it is not that important to say, except sometimes services are in silos of we only deal with this age or we only deal with this age. But a provider that's FASD informed is going to be going to be able to help someone at any age, although there are specific things in the different age ranges that do occur. But a lot of the things that you need to know that people as service providers need to know about FASD don't change through the lifespan. A lot of the things that are important are going to be the same. I want to also go through how, as people call these things, housekeeping issues real briefly. The bathrooms are right out there, right around the corner of women's and men's across the hall. There is another room right across the hall, and Kimberly, raise your hand, is going to be over there if anyone wants to be over there because this is getting a little too intense. And just talk or do something a little bit, have a relaxation, do something a little bit different. than what's going on in here, feel free to go over there. And Kimberly has some activities and things that might be interesting for people. So check Kimberly out if you want to have a break from being in here. And lunch is at noon, and I know people had some, we should have a range of menu options. If you have an issue with what we have, just let me know. Don't go home hungry. And I think that's it for, does anybody have, oh, the other thing I wanted to say for in this area is self-care. Self-care is important to all human beings, but people who are caregiving for someone with FASD need to do self-care as much as anybody. So today, self-care is important. If you need something and you don't see it, or if you have a problem or something, or you want the lights dimmed or whatever, just if you want to get up and walk around, please take care of yourself. So this is really an informal place, and we just deal with things as they come up, don't we? Yeah, take a deep breath. I see him taking a deep breath. That's a good idea. Let's all breathe. I know I needed that. Okay, so let's get started on the introduction that I wanted to. I probably forgot one other thing, but I'll probably interject something that I wanted to introduce as we go along. And I don't think I have a clicker, so that means I got to run back and forth. That is not cute. Does that work on this? On any? Oh, a clicker, great. This is the outline of what I want to talk about. Why is it important to have an FASD-informed provider? Who needs to become an FASD-informed? Who needs to become FASD-informed? What is required to be an FASD-informed provider? How can a provider become FASD-informed? And what can we do to create FASD-informed providers in Wisconsin? Wow, if we could solve that today, wouldn't that be great? Oh, that's how that works. Oh, turning it off, that doesn't work. So I think this is the second screen. These are just some of the reasons that came off the top of my head about why many of us have discovered that when you try to work with a provider who isn't FASD informed, things oftentimes don't work. The service isn't helpful, and people just leave the provider and say, well, there's nobody that can help me. Mistakes are made. That happens. And how many people have had experiences that are with difficult provider issues? Yeah, 3/4 of the room. I mean, difficult issues with providers, not difficult providers, because I think we're all trying to do the best that we can. The services become ineffective when the person is not FASD informed. Individuals and families do not get needed supports. There's stress, misunderstanding, and blame, which damages individual and family relationships. There's things like social issues, like school dropout, crime, addiction, mental health problems, and lives that could be positive and be contributing are lost. So these are just a few of the things that came to the top of my head as far as what we experience when we don't have an FASD-informed provider. And okay, so who needs to know about FASD? Well, just about everybody, because these are some facts which, we should all have one of these and put them in our back pocket and pull them out for people. The rates of FASD are higher than autism, Down syndrome, spina bifida. It is not well known. There are two studies by Philip May, and I've got the reference at the bottom there. He studied children in a Midwestern community and came out with his first study in 2014 that found rates of 2.4 to 4.8% of the children in a Midwestern community. 1,400 public and private school first graders were evaluated. And then he added to that in the next couple years and came out with his next study, results of his next research in 2018. He went to Rocky Mountain, Southeastern, and Pacific Southwestern in addition to the Midwestern region. And he came up with 1.1% to 5%. And he estimates that the rates are actually higher than that because he didn't want to be challenged, so he used the most conservative measure of evaluating the rates. So we can argue about there's a lot more information about prevalence in other countries, and Anne wants to add something.
And when he adjusted the numbers actually hit 3.9 to 9.8% in those.
In the same study, counting with a different, method. Yeah, up to 9% is what he found with it. So they're continuing to refine the research. That's the general population. Many of us deal with special populations, foster care, is a common occurrence when people are dealing with alcohol and having difficulty taking care of their children, so the children may be in out-of-home care. So foster care is a factor in many children who have FASD. So they estimate, this is just for FAS, which is only a small proportion of people who have all of FASD, 10 times of the general population, and that was a 2002 study. Here's some more statistics. Child welfare, inmate population, mental illness, problem with the law, displaying inappropriate sexual behavior, and school disruptions, not finishing school. So if you're dealing with people in those populations, then there's other lists that you undoubtedly have a higher percentage. Here's some more facts and figures, and if we use 2 to 5% in the second one down here, does this do that like one thing at a time? I don't know. In Wisconsin, I took the 2 to 5% times the average number of babies that are born each year in Wisconsin. So that would be 1,320 babies born each year in Wisconsin with FASD. So this is a public health issue, right, Peggy? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I had to do that. In Minnesota, they did a study, and 1 in 5 pregnant people, they said, we're trying to get away from saying it's all the woman's fault. So now people are changing their language. So we say, so that I can see that that's what they did here. 1 in 5 people in Minnesota did not receive any message about alcohol use from their doctor, pregnant people. Or were told they could drink lightly or in moderation. And that still happens in Wisconsin. I've heard people tell me that. And people who had alcohol screening and brief interventions from a social service agency, pregnant people, were 5 times more likely to abstain from alcohol. So the whole idea of getting in there early and educating people is part of the issue, the lifetime issue of how this affects all of us. and FASD affects all of us. FASD costs the U.S. between 1.6 and 5.4 billion each year. So, and the costs include, this is some of the things that are engaged in as services: developmental disability, special education, social services and vocational services, and institutional care are used commonly by people with FASD. So I'm just giving you kind of, this is a little bit of FASD 101. So that's why it's important that everybody who is providing services needs to have some awareness of FASD, because it will occur in the populations they're dealing with, and because it makes a big difference. And I'm hoping this afternoon we're going to be talking, Diane was going to be talking more about how it makes a big difference, to understand some of the characteristics that relate to the behavior that go back to the brain issues that happen when a baby is exposed to alcohol, what happens in the brain. So who needs to become FASD informed? I just put some lists together. And your check did her own survey of parents who have dealt with service systems that have children with FASD, and these are some of the, see, it goes on. Some of the people who interact with individuals with FASD. You also have that list in your handout, in your folders. What is required to become FASD informed? Basic knowledge of FASD. It's not like, you don't have to understand the whole brain. The basic knowledge of FASD isn't that difficult to learn. And a screening tool for your practice is helpful, and there are many of them out there. In the back of this book, there are examples of screening tools. You can also find some online for different purposes of when you're doing intake or asking people routine questions, how to look for red flags of possible FASD. Of course, if you screen for FASD, where do you refer if you think the person has red flags that they need to be maybe evaluated for FASD, for a possible diagnosis? So we're in desperate need of diagnostic and clinical follow-up services in this state and just about everywhere in the United States, probably in the world. And then, so you get someone who is diagnosed with FASD. What does that mean for how you accommodate them in communications and the way you provide services, just even from the first time you talk with them, in order to make your program accessible for them? People need to, that's probably one of the most important things. People need to know how to accommodate the issues that a person with FASD has that will make them unable to access the service and just go away, drop out of school, quote unquote fail vocational rehabilitation, end up in jail or prison because they can't defend themselves or tell their attorney their version of what happened. I mean, those are very difficult things for someone with an FASD to do. Answer questions, can't do it. Often, not everyone. So, are there ways for providers to become FASD informed? And this is the exciting thing. In the last 5 or 6 years, there are so many. You just Google FASD training for social workers, FASD training for attorneys, pediatricians. These are just a few resources. The AAP, American Academy of Pediatricians, has a toolkit, an FASD toolkit with a lot of different resources for training. The CDC is the second one on the list there. Um, and I actually have them up here, and I think I'm not going to take the time, but you go to these websites and you find the webinars or the training that is for free right on the website and YouTube. And there's just a lot of places where there's a lot of very, very good training available. Actually, and in 2012, the American Bar Association has a resolution, passed a resolution on FASD, and it's really cool. It basically says that people with FASD need to come in contact with the legal system in greater numbers than the average population, and the legal system needs to be knowledgeable and responsive to people with FASD. So my thought is that what if we had in Wisconsin an FASD certification program where somebody could say, yeah, I took that course, I'm FASD informed, I have my certificate, like they have to take for AODA, like they have to take for trauma informed. So I'm thinking of how we might do that. In Minnesota, foster care workers, they just passed a state law that foster care workers have to take a training in FASD. All of them do. So that's something we could do in Wisconsin as well. So I put question marks because I'd love to have any brainstorming. Does anybody in the audience have ideas for, be thinking of it now, or does anybody have any questions? I think I'm done with this. Yes. Does anybody have any thoughts about what we might do in Wisconsin or what some of our challenges are? And maybe this is not the time to discuss them because we'll be talking about it this afternoon. But anybody have anything right now? Yes? So the whole idea of how the stigma then that comes in to try to prevent people from drinking. If people say we want to drink here in Wisconsin, there's nothing wrong with it. Is that what you're saying?
And in the field, and people can be educated. I think that, instead of putting commercials for that, why don't we put commercials about drinking during pregnancy and how dangerous it can be? Starting there, in health class with children. I don't know. I don't have any answers, but I did OWI in Wisconsin for my second job, and it's just my classes are always filled with first-time offenders.
We have laws, and people are still drinking and driving. Yeah.
That's about the size of it.
Yep.
One of the things we're fighting is because I've been very for years. The alcohol lobby, the tavern league is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
They can manipulate the county health board when they don't want to hear it. And so it's very hard to break that down. We actually it took us 7 years to get one in Grant County, and then now we can't talk about it anymore. So. Yeah, I'm Katie from the Department of Health Services. I see some cases that I might have.
And I had worked with my neighborhood to really change alcohol laws in Wisconsin. Most of those are at the local civic jurisdiction. And so it did take me rounding up some of my neighbors and going into the city of Madison meetings and hand carrying in the research and going to meetings. It didn't cost money. It did take a lot of time you know, but we were able to really make change, but we have to do that sustainably. You know, I had to keep recruiting new people to do that. And sometimes what the Tavern League says in the open and what they say privately can be two different things. Because sometimes they very quietly would say, Jamie, thank you, it was getting dangerous down here. Because I live and work, I was born on West Midland in 1960. you know, I'm so local. And, you know, they'll privately say thank you, you know. You know, out in public they might say something different. I had the vice president of the Wisconsin Tavern League call me and say, Jamie, you were quoted in the newspaper, and you made us look very bad. I have never gotten in trouble for work, and I have been in the State Journal like 40 times over the years. You know, it's just kind of how you do it, but you have to know how to do it, and we have to keep it up.
So that's our culture in Wisconsin. We're starting with that, you know, and I think it impacts the way doctors want to diagnose and shy away from the stigma that they consider might be given to a child or a family if they diagnose FASD. And in what other, I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a minute here. What other medical condition that's chronic, lifelong, and has serious consequences, especially when not treated and acknowledged, do doctors say, oh, I won't diagnose you with that because you won't get services. Let's do autism instead. And that happens. People tell me that happens. And they're probably, how many people in the room have had people tell them that? Yep. So what other condition would a doctor feel comfortable saying, I'm not going to give you the real medical diagnosis for these social reasons? I mean, so I'm really wanting to turn to doctors. That's why the medical home model has, if Becky can get her computer going, I feel so sorry for her running in and out.
I want to go back to the beginning of our adoption. And she came from a family with seven kids in that family. Social services was involved with the family. We didn't know to what extent. We found out about our daughter through, word of mouth, and it was a very quick adoption. We went down there, we saw the condition that she was living in. Let's get her the heck out of here, and they made the adoption go through very quickly. And but after we brought her home, we just started seeing, things. She tripped. She'd continually trip through the day. How many times a day? 50 times a day. And her coordination was so bad. When she started to talk, her articulation was, off. And then I immediately just started doing research. And we didn't know what was going on. We had no idea what the background information was. We did not really know, like I say, what the extent that social services was involved with this family. But they knew. They knew that there was drinking going on and there was drugs. And we found out after the fact, after all my research, this is like 3 years down the road, I started calling back to the family again. I said, I started researching fetal alcohol. And so I called back and I said, do you know anything about this? And, there's the two next older kids. She disclosed to me at that time, this is the aunt who had custody of the kids, and the next two older kids had been diagnosed with fetal alcohol. And had I known from social services, had they disclosed the information that the extent of drugs and alcohol that were involved with this family, we could have started researching quicker and getting the proper diagnosis and the proper help for her. But it took, I don't know how many years down the road, like 4 years until we could really start to, get her help. So I feel early intervention is important. They need that. And so I blame social services, that didn't disclose that information. So it needs to start there. It needs to start there, and the doctor that, you know, was working with the mother at the time. And, you know,
parental rights terminated, so she was the only child still with the biological mother of all of those siblings. All of them have been removed by social services.
Yeah.
Two here, two here, two with the next.
Grandparents and
I mean, there was a lot of flags, but nothing happened.
Nobody gave us that information. And
I described this day as the morning is going to be, the challenge, not the disaster. Like that word.
That sounded too negative. But I think we're going to see reoccurring issues, and that's a very complex thing, I think, is why didn't it occur in the medical records? For starters, that's basic medical information. Why is that omitted from medical records that follow a child through their lives? Yes. So you're saying that there were a lot of red flags, and all of those people on that list of who needs to be FASD informed, not all of them, but that interacted with the family, missed the red flags, didn't think it was important, didn't want to stigmatize the child in adoption, or
They didn't ask the question. They'll ask the question.
didn't ask the question.
But they weren't, especially, I don't know where we are now, but they didn't ask the question. They'd ask about all the other things, like all my kids were opioids, they had this, and this, but no one asked the question. But fortunately, about the alcohol, fortunately I had the oldest siblings who told me what it is, so they were able to confirm for it. But they did not. It wasn't in the records, and besides, when we adopted the kids from Minnesota, we weren't allowed to see any records. And Susan Carlson, who opened MoFast, who was in part of MoFast, I ran into her at a conference. She goes, "You got that family. You got the most extensive termination of parental rights family in the state of Minnesota," and we knew they had fetal alcohol. They just didn't tell you.
Yeah. So again, I think to me, a doctor takes an oath. A doctor is required to not do medical malpractice, is liable for things like not diagnosing or so the whole system around the medical care, that's why I'm thinking the medical home model might be a way that we can start to make a difference if I'm not sure how, but there's the American Academy of Pediatrics has the FASD toolkit that really makes a good start, which trains doctors, has best practices for doctors around FASD. And in your packet is an article that just came out this month from the AAP on interventions in a medical home for children with FASD. So if we can only get doctors to read these things, if you have this article and you go to a doctor, even if it's not a pediatrician, if it's a primary care doctor, and if the person is an adult, not a child, there's a lot of good information in there that's from, they don't have to believe us. It's from their own professional organization, and we've really given some thought to this in previous years about how important it is for their own professional organization to help us to advocate. And you can just say, look on your own, website, look here. Don't take my word for it. This is why it's important. This is what it is. So that's a little bit of my, yeah, Peggy?
If we were really able to garner some sort of cadre of people, either like a community of practice, task force work group, and look at it from how tobacco really actually changed the cultural and the lay of the land in Wisconsin. That was not an easy road to take, but they did move forward and move, tobacco not, even to smoke-free housing, to bars and restaurants and such. The rate of tobacco
and nicotine actually. Smoking hasn't necessarily decreased because of e-cigarettes per se. However, I think what it really happened was a change of the culture within the medical provider, where at one time all physicians, many physicians smoked. We now have a Supreme Court nominee who has said over and over and over again how much he had drank and drinks beer to the Senate, you know. So it's so ingrained in our culture that we really have to look at it from that public health lens and look at ways and methods that we can change that culture. And I know some communities have even like their events because they were so dependent on beer tents to run many of their recreation or programs and such. Many communities have said no, they're not going to do that anymore, and so they don't provide those beer tents anymore. But then they need some other type of funding mechanisms to pay for those other things that their beer tents pay for. And so it's just so ingrained in summer events and all our things that I think there's a lot of ways to, you know, kick this cat, I guess I'll say.
I guess back to my earlier idea of not saying, you know, it's the tavern league's fault. It's their fault. You're not going to get people to cooperate with you if you're pointing a finger at them. And it's all of our problem. And we need to look at this as a community issue that we're all contributing to, that we all are responsible for the costs and the things that we could do better. And just a short shout out to the idea used to be that I don't want to diagnose your child with this because there's no services anyway, and besides it's brain damage. What can we do with brain damage? And anyone who's worked with someone with FASD knows that there's a ton of, I mean, it makes a huge difference when you get a diagnosis and you approach a person with FASD from the aspect, and maybe Skylar can tell us a little bit more about that later, that once you know what you're dealing with, you have all kinds of tools of things to do. So I'm hoping that idea that, you know, it doesn't make any difference if you diagnose because there's nothing that you can do. I'm sure there are people out there that still have that attitude.